We're live. Okay, today's reading, Plato reading, is continuing our reading of not Phaedo, not Crito. You know what we were reading. Phaedrus. That's right. Where did we pause? Okay. Where are we? Okay. I think it was here. That's right, Phaedrus. Okay, this is still Socrates. If you want to follow the dialogue, I'm reading from lines 252, section C, exactly section C. You may believe this or not as you like, but seriously, the cause of love is, as I've said, and this is how lovers really feel. If the man who is taken by love used to be an attendant on Zeus, he will be able to bear the burden of this feathered force with dignity. But it is one of Ares' troops who has fallen prisoner of love, if that is the god with whom he took the circuit. Then, if he has the slightest suspicion that the boy he loves has done him wrong, he turns murderous, and he's ready to make a sacrifice of himself as well as the boy. So it is with each of the gods. Everyone spends his life honoring the gods in whose circus and whose chorus he danced and emulates that god in every way he can, so long as he remains undefiled and in his first life down here. And that is how he behaves with everyone at every turn, not just with those he loves. Everyone chooses his love after his own fashion from among those who are beautiful, and then treats the boy like his very own god, building him up and adorning him as an image of honor and worship. Those who followed Zeus, for example, chose someone to love who is as Zeus himself in the nobility of his soul, so they make sure he has a talent for philosophy and the guidance of others. And once they have found him and are in love with him, they do everything to develop that talent. If any lovers have not yet embarked on this practice, then they start to learn using any source they can and also making progress on their own. They are well equipped to track down their god's true nature with their own resources because of their driving need to gaze at the god. And as they are in touch with the god by memory, they are inspired by him and adapt his customs and practices so far as a human being can share a god's life. For all of this, they know they have the boy to thank, and so they love him all the more. And if they draw their inspiration from Zeus, then like the Bacchants, they pour it into the soul of the one they love in order to help him take on as much of their own god's qualities as possible. Hera's followers look for a kingly character, and once they have found him, they do all the things for him. And so it is for followers of Apollo or any other god. They take their god's path and seek for their own boy whose for their own a boy whose nature is like the gods. And when they have got him, they emulate the god, convincing the boy they love and training him to follow their god's pattern and way of life, so far as is possible in each case. They show no envy, no mean-spirited lack of generosity toward the boy, but make every possible effort to draw him into being totally like themselves and the god to whom they are devoted. This, then, is any true lover's heart's desire. If he follows that desire in the manner I described, this friend who has been driven mad by love will secure a consummation for the one he has befriended, that is, as beautiful and blissful as I said, if, of course, he captures him. Here, then, is how the captive is caught. I just realized that I had read all those parts yesterday, but it doesn't hurt to uh, read it for the second time. But I think now, um, let's see, I think I'm still not sure where I stopped. But anyway, continuing. Remember how we divided each soul in three at the beginning of our story, two parts in the form of horses and the third in that of a charioteer? Let us continue with that. One of the horses, we said, is good, the other not. But we did not go into the details of the goodness of the good horse or the badness of the bad. Let us do that now. The horse that is on the right or nobler side is upright in frame and well jointed, with a high neck and a regal nose. His coat is white, his eyes are black, and he is a lover of honor with modesty and self control. Companion to true glory, he needs no whip, and is guided by verbal commands alone. The other horse is a crooked, crooked great jumble of limbs with a short bull neck, a pug nose, black skin, and bloodshot white eyes. Companion to wild boasts and indecency, he is shaggy around the ears, deaf as a post, and just barely yields to horsewhip and goad combined. Now, when the charioteer looks in the eye of love, his entire soul is suffused with a sense of warmth and starts to fill with tingles and the goading of desire. As for the horses, the one who is obedient to the charioteer is still controlled, then as always, by its sense of shame, and so prevents itself from jumping on the boy. The other one, however, no longer responds to the whip or the goad of the charioteer. It leaps violently forward and does everything to aggravate its yokemate and its charioteer, trying to make them go up to the boy and suggest to him the pleasures of sex. At first, the other two resist, angry in their belief that they are being made to do things that are dreadfully wrong. At last, however, when they see no end to their trouble, they are led forward, reluctantly agreeing to do as they have been told. So they are close to him now, and they are struck by the boy's face as if by a bolt of lightning. When the charioteer sees that face, his memory is carried back to the real nature of beauty, and he sees it again where it stands on the sacred pedestal next to self control. Oh, I would love to know the Greek for that word self control there. So for Sune, Um, at the sight, he is frightened, falls over backwards, awestruck, and at the same time has to pull the reins back so fiercely that both horses are set on their haunches, one falling back voluntarily with no resistance, but the other insolent and quite unwilling. They pull back a little further, and while one horse drenches the whole soul with sweat out of shame and awe, the other, once it has recovered from the pain caused by the bit in its fall, bursts into a torrent of insults as soon as it has caught its breath, accusing its charioteer and yokemate of all sorts of cowardice and unmanliness for abandoning their position and their agreement. Now, once more, it tries to make its unwilling partner advance and gives in grudgingly only when they beg it to wait till later. Then, when the promised time arrives and they are pretending to have forgotten, it reminds them, it struggles, it gnaws, it pulls them forward and forces them to approach the boy again with the same proposition. And as soon as they are near, it drops its head, straightens its tail, bites the bit, and pulls without any shame at all. The charioteer is now struck with the same feelings as before, only worse, and he's falling back as he would from a starting gait, and he violently yanks the bit back out of the teeth of the insolent horse, only harder this time, so that he bloodies its foul speaking tongue and jaws, sets its legs and haunches firmly on the ground, and, in quotation, gives it over to pain. When the bad horse has suffered the same thing time after time, it stops being so insolent. Now it is humble enough to follow the charioteer's warnings, and when it sees the beautiful boy, it dies of fright, with the result that now at last the lover's soul follows its boy in reverence and awe, and because he is served with all the attentions due a god by a lover who is not pretending otherwise but is truly in the throes of love, and because he is by nature disposed to be a friend of the man who is serving him, even if he has already been set against love by school friends or others who say that it is shameful to associate with a lover and initially rejects the lover in consequence, a time goes forward he is brought as time goes forward, he is brought by his ripening age and a sense of what must be to a point where he lets the man spend time with him. It is a decree of fate, you see, that bad is never friends with bad, while good cannot fail to be friends with good. Now that now that he allows his lover to talk and spend time with him, and the man's good will is close at hand, the boy is amazed by it as he realizes that all the friendship he has from his other friends and relatives put together is nothing compared to that of this friend who is inspired by a god. After the lover has spent some time doing this, staying near the boy, and even touching him during sports and no other occasions, then the spring that feeds the stream's use named Desire, then the spring that feeds the stream's Zeus named Desire when he was in love with Ganymede begins to flow mightily in the lover and is partly absorbed by him, and when he is filled it overflows and runs away outside him. Think how a breeze or an echo bounces back from a smooth, solid object to its source. That is how the stream of beauty goes back to the beautiful boy and sets him aflutter. It enters through his eyes, which are its natural route to the soul. There it waters the passages for the wings, starts the wings growing, and fills the soul of the loved one with love in return. Then the boy is in love, but has no idea what he loves. He does not understand and cannot explain what has happened to him. It is as if he had caught an eye disease from someone else, but could not identify the cause. He does not realize that he is seeing himself in a lover as in a mirror. So when the lover is near, the boy's pain is relieved just as the lover's is, and when they are apart, he yearns as much as he is yearned for, because he has a mirror image of him, of love in him. Quote, back love. Though he neither speaks nor thinks of it as love but as friendship, still his desire is nearly the same as the lover's, though weaker. He wants to see, touch, kiss, and lie down with him, but of course, as you might expect, he acts on these desires soon after they occur. When they are in bed, the lover's undisciplined horse has a word to say to the charioteer, that after all its sufferings it is entitled to a little fun. Meanwhile, I mean, come on, how can you not read that and think, yeah, you've been there. You've had that experience from the charioteer, right? That you've suffered for a little bit, so maybe it's time to have some fun. Meanwhile, the boy's bad horse has nothing to say but swelling with desire, confused, it hugs the lover and kisses him in delight at his great goodwill. And whenever they are lying together, it is completely unable, for its own part, to deny the lover any favor he might beg to have. Its yoke-mate, however, along with, with its charioteer, resists such requests with modesty and reason. Now, if the victory goes to the better elements in both their minds, which lead them to follow the assigned regimen of philosophy, their life here below is one of bliss and shared understanding. They are modest and fully in control of themselves now, that they have enslaved the part that brought them trouble into the soul and set free the part that gave its virtue. After death, when they have grown wings and become weightless, they have won the first of three rounds in these, the true Olympic contests. There is no greater good than this that either human self control or divine madness can offer a man. If, on the other hand, they adopt a lower way of living with ambition in place of philosophy, then pretty soon, when they are careless because they have been drinking or for some other reason, the pair's undisciplined horses will catch their souls off guard and together bring them to commit that act which ordinary people would take to be the happiest choice of all. And when they have consummated once, they go on doing this for the rest of their lives, but sparingly, since they have not approval of what they are doing with their whole minds. So these two also live in mutual friendship, though weaker than that of the philosophical pair, both while they are in love and after they have passed beyond it, because they realize they have exchanged such firm vows that it would be forbidden for them ever to break them and become enemies. In death, they are wingless when they leave the body, but their wings are bursting to sprout. So the prize they have won from the madness of love is considerable, because those who have begun the sacred journey in lower heaven may not by law be sent into darkness for the journey under the earth. Their lives are bright and happy as they travel together, and thanks to their love, they will grow wings together when the time comes. These are the rewards you will have from a lover's friendship, my boy, and they are as great as divine gifts should be. A non lover's companionship, on the other hand, is diluted by human self control. All it pays are cheap, human dividends. And though the slavish attitude it engenders in a friend's soul is widely praised, as virtue it tosses the soul around for 9,000 years on earth and leaves it mindless beneath it. So now, dear love, this is the best and most beautiful palinode we could offer as payment for our debt, especially in view of the rather poetical choice of words Phaedrus made me use. Forgive us our earlier speeches in return for this one. Be kind and gracious toward my expertise at love, which is your own gift to me. Do not, out of anger, take it away or disable it, and grant that I may be held in higher esteem than ever by those who are beautiful. If Phaedrus and I said anything that shocked you in our earlier speech, blame it on Lysias, who was its father, and put a stop to his making speeches of this sort. Convert him to philosophy like his brother Polemarchus, so that his lover here may no longer play both sides as he does now, but simply devote his life to love through philosophical discussions. Phaedrus now responds, I join you in your prayer, Socrates. If this is really best for us, may it come to pass. As to your speech, I admired it from the moment you began. You managed it much better than your first one. I'm afraid that Lysias' effort to match it is bound to fall flat, if, of course, he even dares to try to offer a speech of his own. In fact, my marvelous friend, a politician I know, was only recently taking Lysias to task for just that reason. All through his invective, he kept calling him a speechwriter, so perhaps his pride will keep him from writing this speech for us. And Socrates says, Ah, what a foolish thing to say, young man. How wrong you are about your friend. He can't be intimidated so easily, but perhaps you thought the man who was taking him to task meant what he said as a reproach? Phaedrus says, He certainly seemed to, Socrates. In any case, you are surely aware yourself that the most powerful and renowned politicians are ashamed to compose speeches or leave any writings behind. They are afraid that in later times they may come to be known as, quote, sophists. Socrates says, Phaedrus, you don't understand the expression, quote, pleasant bend, end quote. It originally referred to the long bend of the Nile, and besides the bend, you also don't understand that the most ambitious politicians love speechwriting and long for their writings to survive. In fact, when they write one of their speeches, they are so pleased when people praise it that they add at the beginning, a list of its admirers everywhere. Phaedrus, what do you mean I don't understand? Socrates, don't you know that the first thing politicians put in their writings is the name of their admirers? Phaedrus, how so? Socrates, resolved, the author often begins, quote, by the council, end quote, or quote, by the people, end quote, or by both, and quote, so on and so said, end quote, meaning himself, the writer, with great solemnity and self-importance. Only then does he go on with what he has to say, showing off his wisdom to his admirers, often composing a very long document. Do you think there's any difference between that and written speech? Phaedrus, no, I don't. Socrates, well, then, if it remains on the books, he's delighted and leaves the stage a poet. But if it is struck down, if he fails as a speechwriter and isn't considered worthy of having his work written down, he goes into deep mourning, and his friends along with him. Phaedrus, he certainly does. Socrates, clearly, then, they don't feel contempt for speechwriting. On the contrary, they are in awe of it. Phaedrus, quite so. Socrates, there is this too. What if an orator or a king who acquires enough power to match Lycurgus, Solon, or Darius as a lawgiver, and acquires immortal fame as a speechwriter in his city? Doesn't he think that he is equal to the gods while he is still alive? And don't those who live in later times believe just the same about him when they behold his writings? Phaedrus, very much so. Socrates, do you really believe then that any one of these people, whoever he is, and however much he hates Lysias, would reproach him for being a writer? Phaedrus, it certainly isn't likely in view of what you said, for he would probably be reproaching his own ambition as well. Socrates, this then is quite clear. Writing speeches is not in itself a shameful thing. Phaedrus, how could it be? Socrates, it's not speaking or writing well that's shameful. What's really shameful is to engage in either of them shamefully or badly. Phaedrus, that is clear. Socrates, so what distinguishes good from bad writing? Do we need to ask this question of Lysias or anyone else who ever did or will write anything, whether a public or a private document, poetic verse or plain prose? Phaedrus, You ask if we need to? Why else should one live, I say, if not for pleasure of this sort? Certainly not for those you cannot feel unless you're first in pain, like most of the pleasures of the body, and which for this reason we call the pleasure of slaves. Socrates, it seems we clearly have the time. Besides, I think that the cicadas, who are singing and carrying on conversations with one another in the heat of the day above our heads, are also watching us. And if they saw the two of us avoiding conversation at midday like most people, diverted by their song and sluggish of mind, nodding off, they would have every right to laugh at us, convinced that a pair of slaves had come to their resting place to sleep like sheep gathering around the spring in the afternoon. But if they see us in conversation steadfastly navigating around them as if they were the sirens, they will be very pleased and immediately give us the gift from the gods that they are able to give to mortals. Phaedrus, what is this gift? I don't think I have heard of it. Socrates, everyone who loves the Muses should have heard of this. The story goes that the Cicadas used to be human beings who lived before the birth of the Muses. When the Muses were born and song was created for the first time, some of the people of that time were so overwhelmed with the pleasure of singing that they forgot to eat and drink, so they died without even realizing it. It is from them that the race of the cicadas came into being, and as a gift from the Muses, they have no need of nourishment once they are born. Instead, they immediately burst into song without food or drink until it is time for them to die. After they die, they go to the Muses and tell each one of them which mortals have honored her. To okay, to Terpsichore, they report those who have honored her by their devotion to the dance and thus make them dearer to her. To Erato, they report those who honored her by dedicating themselves to the affairs of love, and so, too, with the other muses, according to the activity that honors each. And to Calliope, the oldest among them, and Urania, the next after her, who preside over the heavens and all discourse, human and divine, and sing with the sweetest voice, they report those who honor this their special kind of music by leading a philosophical life. There are many reasons, then, why we should talk and not waste our afternoon in sleep. Phaedrus. By all means, let's talk. Socrates. Well, then, we ought to examine the topic we proposed just now. When is speech well written? When is a speech well written and delivered, and when is it not? Phaedrus. Plainly. Socrates. Won't someone who is to speak well and nobly have to have in mind the truth about the subject he is going to discuss? Phaedrus. What I've actually heard about this, Socrates, my friend, is that it is not necessary for the intending orator to learn what is really just, but only what will seem just to the crowd, who will act as judges, nor again what is really good or noble, but only what will seem so. For that is what persuasion proceeds from, not truth. Socrates, anything that wise men say, Phaedrus, is not lightly to be cast aside. We must consider whether it might be right, and what you just said in particular must not be dismissed. Phaedrus, you're right. Socrates, let's look at it this way then. Phaedrus, how? Suppose I were trying to convince you that you should fight your enemies on horseback and neither one of us knew what a horse is. But I happen to know this much about you, that Phaedrus believes a horse is the tame animal with the longest ears. Phaedrus, but that would be ridiculous, Socrates. Socrates, not quite yet, actually. But if I were seriously trying to convince you, having composed a speech in praise of the donkey in which I called it a horse, and claim that having such an animal is of immense value both at home and in military service, that is good for fighting and for carrying your baggage, and that it is useful for much else besides. Phaedrus. Well, that would be totally ridiculous. Socrates. Well, which is better, to be ridiculous and a friend, or clever and an enemy? Phaedrus. The former. Socrates. And so when a rhetorician, let's try it again. And so when a rhetorician, okay now. And so when rhetorician, when a rhetorician who does not know good from bad, addresses a city which knows no better and attempts to sway it, not praising a miserable donkey as if it were a horse, but bad as if it were good, and having studied what the people believe, persuades them to do something bad instead of good. With that as its seed, what sort of crop do you think rhetoric can harvest? Phaedrus. A crop of really poor quality. Socrates. But could it be, my friend, that we have mocked the art of speaking more rudely than it deserves? For it might perhaps reply, what bizarre nonsense. Look, I'm not forcing anyone to learn how to make speeches without knowing the truth. On the contrary, my advice, for what it is worth, is to take me up only after mastering the truth. But I do make this boast. Even someone who knows the truth couldn't produce conviction on the basis of a systematic art without me. Phaedrus. Well, is that a fair reply? Socrates. Yes, it is. If, that is, the arguments now advancing upon rhetoric testify that it is an art. For it seems to me as if I hear certain arguments approaching and protesting that that is a lie and that rhetoric is not an art but an artless practice. As the Spartan said, there is no genuine art of speaking without a grasp of truth, and there never will be. Phaedrus, we need to hear these arguments, Socrates. Come, produce them and examine them. What is their point? How did they make it? Socrates, come to us, then, noble creatures, convince Phaedrus, him of the beautiful offspring, that unless he pursues philosophy properly, he will never be able to make a proper speech on any subject either. And let Phaedrus be the one to answer. Phaedrus, let them put their questions. Socrates, well, then, isn't the rhetorical art, taken as a whole, a way of directing the soul by means of speech, not only in the law courts and on other public occasions, but also in private? Isn't it one and the same sort? Isn't it one and the same art, whether its subject is great or small, and no more to be held in esteem, if it is followed correctly, when its questions are serious than when they are trivial? Or what have you heard about all this? Phaedrus. Well, certainly not what you have. Artful speaking and writing is found mainly in the law courts, also perhaps in the assembly. That's all I've heard. Socrates. Well, have you only heard of the rhetorical treatises of Nestor and Odysseus, those they wrote in their spare time in Troy? Haven't you also heard of the works of Palamedes? Phaedrus. No, by Zeus, I haven't heard of Nestor's, unless by Nestor you mean Gorgias, and by Odysseus, Thrasymachus or Theodorus. Socrates. Perhaps, but let us leave these people aside. Answer this question yourself. What do adversaries do in the law courts? Don't they speak on opposite sides? What else can we call what they do? Phaedrus. That's it, exactly. Socrates. About what is just and what is unjust? Phaedrus. Yes. And won't whoever does this artfully make the same thing appear to the same people, sometimes just and sometimes when he prefers unjust? Phaedrus. Of course. Socrates. And when he addresses the assembly, he will make the city approve a policy at one time as a good one and reject it, the very same policy, as just the opposite at another? Phaedrus. Right. Socrates. Now, don't we know that the Eleatic Palamedes is such an artful speaker that his listeners will perceive the same things to be both similar and dissimilar, both one and many, both at rest and also in motion? Phaedrus. Most certainly. Socrates. We can therefore find the practice of speaking on opposite sides not only in the law courts and in the assembly, rather it seems that one single art, if of course it is an art in the first place, governs all speaking. By means of it, one can make out as similar anything that can be so assimilated to everything to which it can be made similar, and expose anyone who tries to hide the fact that is what he is doing. Phaedrus. What do you mean by that? Socrates. I think it will become clear if we look at it this way. Where is deception most likely to occur? Regarding things that differ much or things that differ little from one another? Phaedrus. Regarding those that differ little. Socrates. At any rate, you are more likely to escape detection as you shift from one thing to its opposite if you proceed in small steps rather than in large ones. Phaedrus. Without a doubt, Socrates. Therefore, if you are to deceive someone else and to avoid deception yourself, you must know precisely that the respects in which things are similar and dissimilar to one another. Phaedrus. Yes, you must. Socrates. And is it really possible for someone who doesn't know what each thing truly is to detect a similarity, whether large or small, between something he doesn't know and anything else? Phaedrus. That is impossible. Socrates. Clearly, therefore, the state of being deceived and holding beliefs contrary to what is the case comes upon people by reason of certain similarities. Phaedrus. That is how it happens. Socrates. Could someone then who doesn't know what each thing is ever have the art to lead others little by little through similarities away from what is the case on each occasion to its opposite? Or could he escape this being done to himself? Phaedrus. Never. Socrates. Therefore, my friend, the art of a speaker who doesn't know the truth and chases opinion instead is likely to be a ridiculous thing, not an art at all. Phaedrus. So it seems. Socrates. So shall we look for instances of what we call the artful and the artless in the speech of Lysias you carried here, and in our own speeches? Phaedrus. That's the best to do, because as it is, we are talking quite abstractly without enough examples. Socrates. In fact, by some chance, the two speeches do, as it seems, contain an example of the way in which someone who knows the truth can toy with his audience and mislead them. For my part, Phaedrus, I hold the local gods responsible for this. Also, perhaps the messengers of the muses who are singing over our heads may have inspired me with this gift. Certainly, I don't possess any art of speaking. Phaedrus. Fine, fine. But explain what you mean. Socrates. Come then, read me the beginning of Lysias' speech. Phaedrus. You understand my situation. I've told you how good it would be for us, in my opinion, if we could work this out. In any case, I don't think I should lose the chance to get what I'm asking for, merely because I don't happen to be in love with you. A man in love will wish he had not done you any favors. Socrates. Stop. Our task is to say how he fails and writes artlessly, right? Phaedrus. Yes. Socrates. Now, isn't this much absolutely clear? We are in accord with one another about some of the things we discourse about, and in discord about others? Phaedrus. I think I understand what you're saying, but please, can you make it a little clearer? Socrates. When someone utters the word iron or silver, don't we all think of the same thing? Phaedrus. Certainly. But what happens when we say just or good? Doesn't each one of us go in different directions? Don't we differ with one another and even with ourselves? Phaedrus. We certainly do. Socrates. Therefore we agree about the former and disagree about the latter. Phaedrus. Right. Socrates. Now, in which of these two cases are we more easily deceived? And when does rhetoric have greater power? Phaedrus. Clearly when we wander in different directions. Socrates. It follows that whoever wants to acquire the art of rhetoric must first make a systematic division and grasp the particular character of each of these two kinds of thing, both the kind where most people wander in different directions and the kind where they do not. Phaedrus. What a splendid thing, Socrates, he will have understood if he grasps that. Socrates. Second, I think he must not be mistaken about his subject. He must have a sharp eye for the class to which whatever he is about to discuss belongs. Phaedrus. Of course. Socrates. Well, now, what shall we say about love? Does it belong to the class where people differ, or to that where they don't? Phaedrus. Oh, surely the class where they differ. Otherwise, do you think you could have spoken of it as you did a few minutes ago? First saying that it is harmful both to lover and beloved, and then immediately afterward that it is the greatest good? Socrates. Very well put. But now tell me this. I can't remember at all because I was completely possessed by the gods. Did I define love at the beginning of my speech? Phaedrus. Oh, absolutely. By Zeus, you most certainly did. Socrates. Alas, how much more artful with speeches the nymphs, daughters of Achilles, the Pan, and Pan, son of Hermes, are according to what you say, than Lysias, son of Cephalus. Or am I wrong? Did Lysias too, at the start of his love speech, compel us to assume that love is the single thing that he himself wanted it to be? Did he then complete his speech by arranging everything in relation to that? Will you read its opening once again? Phaedrus. If you like, but what you're looking for is not there. Socrates. Read it, so that I can hear it in his own words. Phaedrus. You understand my situation. I've told you how good it would be for us, in my opinion, if we could work this out. In any case, I don't think I should lose the chance to get what I'm asking for, merely because I don't happen to be in love with you. A man in love will wish he had not done you any favors once his desire dies down. Socrates. He certainly seems a long way from doing what we wanted. He doesn't even start from the beginning, but from the end, making his speeches swim upstream on its back. His first words are what a lover would say to his boy as he was concluding his speech. Am I wrong, Phaedrus? Dear heart? Phaedrus. Well, Socrates, that was the end for which he gave the speech. Socrates. And what about the rest? Don't the parts of the speech appear to have been thrown together at random? Is it evident that the second point had to be made second for some compelling reason? Is that so far any of the okay, wait. Is that so for any of the parts? I at least, of course, I know nothing about such matters. Thought thought the author said, I at least, of course I know nothing about such matters, thought the author said just whatever came to mind next, though not without a certain noble willfulness. But you, do you know any principle of speech composition compelling him to place these things one after another in this order? Phaedrus. It's very generous of you to think that I can understand his reasons so clearly. Socrates. But surely you will admit at least this much. Every speech must be put together like a living creature. With a body of its own, it must neither be without head nor without legs, and it must have a middle and extremities that are fitting both to one another and to the whole work. Phaedrus. How could it be otherwise? Socrates. But look at your friend's speech. Is it like that or is it otherwise? Actually, you'll find that it's just like the epigram people say is inscribed on the tomb of Metis the Phrygian. Phaedrus. What epigram is that, and what's the matter with it? Socrates. It goes like this. A maid of bronze am I, on Metis' tomb I lie, as long as water flows, and trees grow tall, shielding the grave, where many come to cry, that Metis rests here, I say to one and all. I am sure you notice that it makes no difference at all which of its verses comes first and which last. Phaedrus. You're making fun of our speech, Socrates. Socrates. Well then, if that upsets you, let's leave that speech aside, even though I think it has plenty of very useful examples, provided one tries to emulate them as little as possible, and turn to the others. I think it is important for students of speech making to pay attention to one of their features. Phaedrus. What do you mean? Socrates. They were in a way opposite to one another. One claimed that one should give one's favors to the lover, the other to the non-lover. Phaedrus. Most manfully too. Socrates. I thought you were going to say madly, which would have been the truth, and is also just what I was looking for. We did say, didn't we, that love is a kind of madness? Phaedrus. Yes, Socrates. And that there are two kinds of madness, one produced by human illness, the other by divinely inspired release from normally accepted behavior? Phaedrus. Certainly. Socrates. We also distinguished four parts within the divine kind and connected them to four gods, having attributed the inspiration of the prophet to Apollo, of the mystic to Dionysus, of the poet to Muses, and the fourth part of madness to Aphrodite and to love. We said that the madness of love is the best. We used a certain sort of image to describe love's passion. Perhaps it had a measure of truth in it, though it may also have led us astray, and having whipped up a not altogether implausible speech, We sang playfully, but also appropriately and respectfully, a story like him to my master and yours, Phaedrus, to love who watches over beautiful boys. Phaedrus, and I listened to it with the greatest pleasure. Socrates, let's take up this point about it right away. How was the speech able to proceed from censure to praise? Phaedrus, what exactly do you mean by that? Socrates, well, everything else in it really does appear to me to have been spoken in play, but part of it was given with fortune's guidance. And there were in it two kinds of things, the nature of which it would be quite wonderful to grasp by means of a systematic art. Phaedrus, which things? Socrates, the first consists in seeing together things that are scattered about everywhere and collecting them into one kind, so that by defining each thing, we can make clear the subject of any instruction we wish to give. Just so with our discussion of love, whether its definition was or was not correct, at least it allowed the speech to proceed clearly and consistently with itself. Phaedrus, and what is the other thing you are talking about, Socrates? Socrates, this, in turn, is to be able to cut up each kind according to its species along its natural joints, and to try not to splinter any part as a bad butcher might do. In just this way, our two speeches placed all mental derangements into one common kind. Then, just as each single body has parts that naturally come in pairs of the same name, one of them being called the right hand and the other the left one, so the speeches having considered unsoundness of mind to be by nature one single kind within us, proceeded to cut it up. The first speech cut its left hand part and continued to cut until it discovered among these parts a sort of love that can be called left handed, which it correctly denounced. The second speech, in turn, led us to the right hand part of madness, discovered a love that shares its name with the other, but is actually divine, set it out before us, and praised it as the cause of our greatest goods. Phaedrus, you are absolutely right. Socrates, well, Phaedrus, I am myself a lover of these divisions and collections, so that I may be able to think and to speak, and if I believe that someone else is capable of discerning a single thing that is also by nature capable of encompassing many, I follow straight behind in his tracks as if he were a god. God knows whether this is the right name for those who can do this correctly or not, but so far I have always called them dialecticians. But tell me what I must call them now that we have learned all this from Lysias and you. Or is it just that art of speaking that that Thrasymachus and the rest of them use, which has made them masters of speech making and capable of producing others like them? Anyhow, those who are willing to bring them gifts and to treat them as if they were kings. Phaedrus, they may behave like kings, but they certainly lack the knowledge you're talking about. No, it seems to me that you're right in calling the sort of thing you mentioned dialectic, but it seems to me rhetoric still eludes us. Socrates, what are you saying? Could there be anything valuable which is independent of the methods I mentioned and is still grasped by art? If there is, you and I must certainly honor it, and we must say what part of rhetoric it is that has been left out. Phaedrus, well, there's quite a lot, Socrates. Everything, at any rate, written up in the books on the art of speaking. Socrates, you were quite right to remind me. First, I believe, there is the preamble with which a speech must begin. That is what you mean, isn't it? The fine points of the art? Phaedrus, yes. Socrates, second come the statement of facts and the evidence of witnesses concerning it. Third, indirect evidence. Fourth, claims to plausibility. And I believe at least that excellent Byzantine word wizards adds confirmation and supplementary confirmation. Phaedrus, you mean the worthy Theodorus? Socrates, quite. And he also adds refutation, supplementary refutation to be used both in prosecution and in defense. Nor must we forget the most excellent Evenus of Paros, which the footnote says is Evenus of Paros was active as a sophist toward the end of the 5th century BC. Only a few tiny fragments of his work survive. Uh, historical figure there. who was a sophist and not much to say about his works. But continuing, Socrates. Okay, going on with Socrates, uh, who was the first to discover covert implication and indirect praise, and who, some say, has even arranged indirect censures in verse as an aid to memory. A wise man indeed. And Tisius and Gorgias. How can we leave them out when it is they who realize that what is likely must be held in higher honor than what is true? They who, by the power of their language, make small things appear great and great things small. They who express modern ideas in ancient garbs and ancient ones in modern dress. They who have discovered how to argue both concisely and at infinite length about any subject. Actually, when I told Prodicus this last, okay, the footnote says Prodicus of Ceos, who lived from about 470 till after 400 BC, is frequently mentioned by Plato in connection with his ability to make fine verbal distinctions. He laughed and said that only he had discovered the art of proper speeches. What we need are speeches that are neither long nor short, but of the right length. Phaedrus, brilliantly done. Prodicus, Socrates. And what about Hippias? Footnote says Hippias of Elis was born in the mid-5th century and traveled widely, teaching a variety of subjects, including mathematics, astronomy, harmony, mnemonics, ethics, and history, as well as public speaking. How can we omit him? I am sure our dear friend from Elis would cast his vote with Prodicus, Phaedrus. Certainly. Socrates. And what shall we say of the whole gallery of the terms? Polis, 53. Okay, so this is not polis as in the city, but Polus, Polus. Polus. The footnote says Polus was a pupil of Gorgias. Plato represents him in the Gorgias, especially at section 448c and 471a to c. He was said to have composed an art of rhetoric. Right, so this is why it's important to read the other dialogues as well, right? So that you get a sense of these references. Right, so Socrates says the whole gallery of terms Polis set up, speaking with reduplication, speaking in maxims, speaking in images, and of the terms Lycaiminus gave him as a present to help him explain good diction. And the footnote says Lycaiminus of Chios was a dithyrambic poet and teacher of rhetoric. Phaedrus, but didn't Protagoras actually use similar terms? Socrates, yes, correct diction, my boy, and other wonderful things. As to the art of making speeches bewailing the evils of poverty and old age, the prize, in my judgment, goes to the mighty Chalcedonian. And the footnote says, literally, the might of the Chalcedonian, a Homeric figure referring to Thrasymachus, who came from Chalcedon. Okay. He it is also who knows best how to inflame a crowd, and once they are inflamed, how to hush them again with his words' magic spell as he himself. And let's not forget that he is as good at producing slander as he is at refuting it, whatever its source may be. As to the way of ending a speech, everyone seems to be in agreement, though some call it recapitulation and others by some other name. Phaedrus, you mean summarizing everything at the end and reminding the audience of what they've heard? Socrates, that's what I mean. And if you have anything else to add about the art of speaking? Phaedrus, only minor points, not worth making. Socrates, well, let's leave minor points aside. Let's hold what we do have come closer to the light so that we can see precisely the power of the art these things produce. Phaedrus. A very great power, Socrates, especially in front of a crowd. Socrates. Quite right. But now, my friend, look closely. Do you think, as I do, that its fabric is a little threadbare? Phaedrus. Can you show me? Socrates. All right, tell me this. Suppose someone came to our friend Iraxamachus or his father Acumenus and said, I know treatments to raise or lower, whichever I prefer, the temperature of people's bodies. If I decide to, I can make them vomit or make their bowels move and all sorts of things. On the basis of this knowledge, I claim to be a physician. I claim to be able to make others physician as well by imparting it to them. What do you think they would say when they heard that? Phaedrus. What could they say? They would ask him if he also knew to whom he should apply such treatments, when and to what extent. Socrates. What if he replied, I have no idea. My claim is that whoever learns from me will manage to do what you ask on his own. Phaedrus. I think they'd say the man's mad if he thinks he's a doctor just because he read a book or happened to come across a few potions. He knows nothing of the art. Socrates. And suppose someone approached Sophocles and Euripides and claimed to know how to compose the longest passages on trivial topics and the briefest ones on topics of great importance, that he could make them pitiful if he wanted, or again, by contrast, terrifying and menacing, and so on. Suppose, further, that he believed that by teaching this, he was imparting the knowledge of composing tragedies. Phaedrus. Oh, I'm sure they too would laugh at anyone who thought a tragedy was anything other than the proper arrangement of these things. They have to fit with one another and with the whole work. Socrates. But I'm sure they wouldn't reproach him rudely. They would react more like a musician confronted by a man who thought he had mastered harmony because he was able to produce the highest and lowest notes on his strings. The musician would not say fiercely, You stupid man, you're out of your mind, as befits his calling. He would speak more gently, my friend, though my friend, though that too is necessary for understanding harmony, someone who has gotten as far as you have may still know absolutely nothing about the subject. What you know is what's necessary to learn before you study harmony, but not harmony itself. Phaedrus. That's certainly right. Socrates. So Sophocles would also tell the man who was showing off to them that he knew the preliminaries of tragedy, but not the art of tragedy itself. And Acumenus would say his man knew the preliminaries of medicine, but not medicine itself. Phaedrus. Absolutely. Socrates. And what if the honey-tongued Adrastes, or perhaps Pericles, were to hear all of the marvelous techniques we just discussed, speaking concisely and speaking in images and all the rest we listed, and propose to examine under the light? Would he be angry or rude as you and I were with those who write of those techniques and teach them as if they are rhetoric itself, and say something coarse to them? Wouldn't he, being wiser than we are, reproach us as well and say, Phaedrus and Socrates, you should not be angry with these people. You should be sorry for them. The reason they cannot define rhetoric is that they are ignorant of dialectic. It is their ignorance that makes them think they have discovered what rhetoric is when they have mastered only what it is necessary to learn as preliminaries. So they teach these preliminaries and imagine their pupils have received a full course on rhetoric, thinking the task of using each of them persuasively and putting them together into a whole speech is a minor matter to be worked out by the pupils from their own resources. Phaedrus. Really, Socrates? The art these men present as rhetoric in their courses and handbooks is no more than what you say. In my judgment, at least, your point is well taken. But how, from what source, could one acquire the art of the true rhetorician? But how, from what source, could one acquire the art of true rhetorician, the really good persuasive speaker? Socrates. Well, Phaedrus, becoming good enough to be an accomplished competitor is probably, perhaps necessarily, like everything else. If you have a natural ability for rhetoric, you will become a famous rhetorician, provided you supplement your ability with knowledge and practice. To the extent that you lack any one of them, to that extent you will be less than perfect. But insofar as there is an art of rhetoric, I don't believe the right method for acquiring it is to be found in the direction of Lysias and Thrasymachus have followed. Phaedrus, where can we find it then? Socrates, my dear friend, maybe we can see now why Pericles was in all likelihood the greatest rhetorician of all. Phaedrus, how is that? Socrates, all the great arts require endless task and ethereal speculation about nature. This seems to be what gives them their lofty point of view and universal applicability. That's just what Pericles mastered, besides having natural ability. He came across Anaxagoras, who was just that sort of man, got his full dose of ethereal speculation, understood the nature of mind and mindlessness, just the subject on which Anaxagoras had the most to say. From this, I think he drew for the art of rhetoric what was useful to it. Phaedrus, what do you mean by that? Socrates, well, isn't the method of medicine in a way the same as the method of rhetoric? Phaedrus, how so? Socrates, in both cases, we need to determine the nature of something, of the body in medicine, of the soul in rhetoric. Otherwise, all we'll have will be an empirical and artless practice. We won't be able to supply, on the basis of an art, a body with the medicines and diet that will make it healthy and strong, or a soul with the reasons and customary rules for conduct that will impart to it the convictions and virtues we want. Phaedrus, that is most likely Socrates. Socrates, do you think, then, that it is possible to reach a serious understanding of the nature of the soul without understanding the nature of the world as a whole? Phaedrus, well, if we were to listen to Hippocrates, ask Asclepius's descendant, we won't even understand the body if we don't follow that method. Socrates, he speaks well, my friend. Still, Hippocrates aside, we must consider whether argument supports that view. Phaedrus, I agree. Socrates, consider then what both Hippocrates and true arguments say about nature. Isn't this the way to think systematically about the nature of anything? First, we must consider whether the object regarding which we intend to become experts and capable of transmitting our expertise is simple or complex. Then, if it is simple, we must investigate its power. What things does it have? What natural power? What what things does it have? What natural power of acting upon? That's an awkward sentence. What things does it have? What natural power of acting upon? By what things does it have what natural disposition to be acted upon? If, on the other hand, it takes many forms, we must enumerate them all, and as we did in the simple case, investigate how each is naturally able to act upon what, and how it has a natural disposition to be acted upon what. Phaedrus, it seems so. Socrates. Socrates, proceeding by any other method would be like walking with the blind. Conversely, whoever studies anything on the basis of an art must never be compared to the blind or the deaf. On the contrary, it is clear that someone who teaches another to make speeches as an art will demonstrate precisely the essential nature of that to which speeches are to be applied, and that surely is the soul. Phaedrus, of course. Socrates, this is therefore the object toward which the speaker's whole effort is directed, since it is in the soul that he attempts to produce conviction. Isn't that so? Phaedrus, yes. Socrates, clearly, therefore, Thrasymachus and anyone else who teaches the art of rhetoric seriously will first describe the soul with absolute precision and enable us to understand what it is, whether it is one and homogeneous by nature or takes many forms, like the shape of bodies, since, as we said, that's what it is to demonstrate the nature of something. Phaedrus. Absolutely. All right, and that concludes our reading for today, and we'll continue from there tomorrow. All right. See you soon.